Imagine owning a marketplace. Not a store, a marketplace. Millions of buyers, tens of thousands of sellers, and you don't handle a single product yourself. You just take a cut of every transaction. It's the same business model behind eBay, Amazon, and Etsy, three of the most valuable companies on Earth. Now imagine that marketplace generates over $1 billion in transactions within a couple of years, run by a single 20-something with almost no employees, no office, and no legal identity. Anyone can trace. Sounds like the most efficient business ever built. So why did that marketplace's founder end up with 2 life sentences plus 40 years? Why did the operator of an even bigger version of it end up dead in a Thai jail cell within a week of his arrest? And why, despite dozens of law enforcement raids stretching back over a decade, does this business model keep coming back? Again and again, virtually unchanged? This is the economics of the dark web, not the mythology of hackers and hoodies, but the actual business logic underneath it. Commission structures, customer trust systems, vendor reputation scores, escrow accounts. Every mechanism a legitimate online marketplace uses to keep buyers and sellers honest, the dark web built its own version first, sometimes years before Silicon Valley did, and built it to survive. Without banks, without customer service lines, and without any legal recourse if something went wrong. What makes this story worth understanding isn't the drugs or the stolen data everyone assumes it's about. It's the fact that an entirely parallel economy, worth tens of billions of dollars, has been operating this whole time using nothing but math, encryption, and reputation, proving that the fundamentals of a marketplace business don't actually require police, courts, or trust in any government at all. They just require people willing to build the same incentives from scratch. The obvious assumption is that the dark web is chaos, an unpoliced, unstructured black market where nobody can be held accountable for anything. That assumption is almost the exact opposite of how these marketplaces have actually operated, and understanding why requires going back to where this entire business model started. In February 2011, a 26-year-old physics graduate named Ross Ulbricht launched a website called Silk Road, accessible only through an anonymity tool called Tor and payable only in Bitcoin, a currency that was, at the time, worth pennies and used almost nowhere else. Ulbricht's stated goal wasn't chaos. It was closer to the opposite, building what he called an economic experiment in a marketplace with no coercion, no violence, and no interference from any government. He modeled Silk Road directly on eBay. Vendors created storefronts. Buyers left reviews. Silk Road took a commission on every sale, typically somewhere between 8 and 15%, depending on transaction size, nearly identical to what a conventional e-commerce platform charges. Today, that commission model is the first hidden truth about this entire economy. Nobody running these platforms needed to invent anything new about how marketplaces work. They just needed to solve one problem traditional marketplaces never had to think about. How do you make 2 anonymous strangers trust each other with money when neither one can ever go to the police? If they get scammed, the answer was escrow, and it became the backbone of every marketplace that followed. A buyer's payment wouldn't reach the vendor immediately. It sat held by the platform itself, until the buyer confirmed the order had arrived. Combined with public vendor ratings, this created something remarkable: a functioning reputation economy built entirely without any of the legal infrastructure, courts, chargebacks, consumer protection agencies that normal commerce depends on to keep sellers honest. By the time federal agents traced Silk Road servers to an Icelandic data center and arrested Ulbricht at a San Francisco public library in October 2013, prosecutors estimated the site had processed roughly $214 million in sales, generating Ulbricht more than $13 million in commissions alone in under 3 years from a business with essentially no overhead. Beyond server costs. That sounds like the end of the story. It was really just the beginning of a pattern that would repeat itself for the next decade, each time somehow bigger than before. What happened after Silk Road's shutdown surprised almost everyone who assumed a single arrest could end an entire underground economy. Within months, successor markets appeared: Silk Road 2.0, Evolution, Agora, each attracting displaced vendors who simply migrated their reputation and inventory elsewhere. This is where most people misunderstand the business entirely. Taking down a single marketplace doesn't eliminate the demand or the vendor base that made it valuable in the first place. It just creates a temporary vacancy that the next platform rushes to fill, usually within weeks. The platform that filled it most successfully was Alphabay, launched in December 2014 by a Canadian named Alexandre Cases. By the time law enforcement caught up with it in 2017, Alphabay had grown roughly 10 times larger than Silk Road ever was, more than 200,000 users, 40,000 vendors, and according to Europol's own conservative estimate, over $1 billion transacted in cryptocurrency across its lifetime. Cases, investigators later discovered, had been living an extravagant lifestyle in Thailand, funded almost entirely by platform commissions, while running what had effectively become the largest criminal marketplace the internet had ever seen. His arrest revealed the second hidden truth about this business: operational security is far harder to maintain forever than to establish once. Cases was tracked down partly because he had used his personal email address in the earliest public posts announcing Alphabay's own launch, years before he became careful about hiding his identity. But that wasn't the biggest problem the takedown created for the broader ecosystem. It's what happened next, in an operation law enforcement still cites as one of the most sophisticated in the history of internet crime. While the FBI and DEA were preparing to seize Alphabay, Dutch National Police had already secretly taken control of Hansa Market, the third largest platform at the time, weeks earlier without telling anyone. When Alphabay went dark, displaced users flooded toward Hansa in search of a new home, exactly as investigators anticipated. What those users didn't know was that Dutch police were now quietly running Hansa themselves, logging usernames, passwords, private messages, and delivery addresses for nearly a month before finally shutting it down too. It was a law enforcement strategy dressed up as a business acquisition. Let your rival's customers walk straight into a trap you already control. This is where the story stops being just about criminal marketplaces and starts becoming a genuine case study in game theory. Every major takedown since has followed some version of the same lesson: displaced demand doesn't disappear, it reroutes, and the platforms that survive longest are the ones that treat operational security less like a technical afterthought and more like their single most important product feature. Law enforcement, though, has never been the only threat to these businesses. The far more common way a darknet marketplace ends isn't a raid at all. It's an exit scam, the operators simply vanishing with every dollar sitting in escrow, betraying the very trust system that made the platform valuable in the first place. Wall Street Market, one of the largest English-language platforms by 2019, had built up more than 1 million registered customers and over 5,000 vendors before its administrators abruptly shut down the site and disappeared with an estimated $11 million in customer funds still held in escrow. There was no lawsuit anyone could file, no regulator to complain to, no deposit insurance covering the loss. The entire safety mechanism that made buyers trust the platform in the first place turned out to be entirely dependent on the goodwill of the same anonymous administrators who controlled it. Researchers who study this ecosystem have found that exit scams, not police raids, are responsible for the sudden disappearance of a significant share of major marketplaces over the years, a built-in structural weakness no amount of encryption can fix, because the vulnerability isn't technical. It's that the person holding everyone's money has both the ability and, eventually, the incentive to simply keep it. That vulnerability created an entirely legitimate business opportunity on the other side of this economy, one hiding in plain sight, funded not by criminals but by governments, banks, and Fortune 500 companies. Firms like Chainalysis, Flashpoint, and Recorded Future built billion-dollar businesses almost entirely around monitoring, tracing, and analyzing the same marketplaces this story has been describing. Chainalysis alone was valued at over $8 billion following a funding round in 2022, built on a business model that depends entirely on darknet markets, ransomware groups, and cryptocurrency. Laundering continuing to exist. It's an uncomfortable but real irony sitting at the center of this whole economy. The criminal marketplaces need buyers and sellers who trust each other to survive, and an entire, perfectly legal industry now depends on those same marketplaces never fully going away. Nowhere was that lesson absorbed more thoroughly than by Hydra Market, a Russian-language platform that by the time German and American authorities finally seized it in April 2022, had become the largest darknet marketplace ever to exist. Blockchain. Analysis firm Chainalysis later calculated that Hydra had processed roughly $5.2 billion in cryptocurrency transactions across its operational lifetime, more than every other major marketplace in this story combined. Hydra had also innovated on the original model in ways that made it strikingly different from a typical illicit marketplace. It built out delivery systems using hidden physical drop locations instead, of postal shipping offered money laundering services to other criminal enterprises as a separate product line and operated with a level of organizational sophistication that outside analysts compared to a genuine logistics company. When it finally fell, investigators seized only about $25 million in cryptocurrency, a small fraction of what had flowed through the platform, most of it long since cashed out through an extensive laundering network the marketplace itself had helped build. That's the pattern that should genuinely unsettle anyone studying this as a business phenomenon rather than a crime story. Each successive marketplace has been larger, more organizationally sophisticated, and more resilient than the one before it, despite over a decade of increasingly coordinated international law enforcement pressure specifically designed to prevent exactly that outcome. But marketplaces selling physical goods were never the most financially sophisticated business to come out of this ecosystem. That distinction belongs to a completely different model that emerged alongside them, one that looks less like an online bazaar and more like a corporate franchise operation, complete with recruitment, revenue splits, and customer support. Cybersecurity researchers refer to it as ransomware as a service, and the structure works almost exactly the way a franchise brand does. A core group develops and maintains the underlying software and infrastructure, then recruits independent operators, known in the industry as affiliates, to actually carry out attacks against individual targets. When an affiliate successfully extorts a victim, the proceeds are split according to a prearranged percentage, the core group typically keeping somewhere between 20 and 30%, with the affiliate who did the legwork keeping the rest. Groups like Ravil, Conti, and Lockbit built exactly this structure throughout the late 2010s and early 2020s, and law enforcement agencies that later infiltrated their operations found something almost mundane sitting underneath the technical sophistication. Internal chat logs revealing employee complaints about pay, disputes over commission splits, and what amounted to human resources. Problems inside a criminal enterprise. That detail matters more than it first appears. It means the most financially damaging form of cybercrime in the world today isn't organized the way movies depict it, a single genius hacker working alone in a dark room. It's organized the way any large service business is organized, a platform provider taking a cut, a distributed sales force doing the actual work, and a shared incentive structure holding it all together, adapted from the exact same franchise economics that built McDonald's, only pointed at extortion instead of hamburgers. That business model has proven durable specifically because it distributes both the labor and the legal risk. When law enforcement dismantled Lockbit's infrastructure in a coordinated international operation in 2024, seizing servers and publishing details about the group's internal operations, it disrupted one platform, but the affiliate network built around it, individuals scattered across multiple countries with no centralized headquarters to raid, simply migrated toward whichever platform offered the next best commission split, the same displacement pattern that has defined this entire economy since Silk Road's first shutdown over a decade earlier. So why, given the resources thrown at destroying this economy, the FBI, the DEA, Europol, IRS criminal investigation, blockchain forensics firms worth billions of dollars in their own right, does it keep growing back? Part of the answer is structural. Unlike a traditional criminal enterprise built around a single boss or a physical headquarters, a darknet marketplace's real assets are almost entirely abstract: a codebase, a reputation system, and a community of vendors who can, in theory, reconstitute themselves anywhere with an internet connection and a new website address. Seize the servers, arrest the administrator, and you've eliminated one node in a network that was never designed to depend on any single node surviving. There's also a quieter technological arms race running underneath all of this that most outsiders never notice. Bitcoin, the currency that made Silk Road possible in the first place, turned out to have a fatal weakness for anyone trying to stay hidden. Every transaction is permanently recorded on a public ledger, which is precisely how blockchain analytics firms eventually traced Alexander Kazes' cryptocurrency withdrawals back to his real identity. In response, later marketplaces increasingly shifted toward Monero, a cryptocurrency specifically engineered to obscure transaction details that Bitcoin exposes by design. That single technical migration illustrates something important about how this economy adapts. Every law enforcement success doesn't just remove one bad actor, it also teaches the next generation of marketplace operators exactly which mistake to avoid repeating. The other part of the answer is closer to a psychological insight than a technical one. Every one of these marketplaces succeeded, at least initially, by solving a trust problem. convincing thousands of anonymous strangers that an escrow system, a rating page, and a pseudonymous administrator were more reliable than doing business with no structure at all. That's an almost exact mirror of what made eBay work in 1997, or what makes Uber work today. Strangers will transact with other strangers at scale, as long as someone builds a system that makes betrayal costly and cooperation easy to verify. The dark web didn't invent that principle. It just proved the principle works even when there's no possibility of ever calling the police. Which brings the story to its final, uncomfortable irony. President Trump's decision in January 2025 to grant Ross Ulbricht a full and unconditional pardon more than a decade after his conviction, and after years of lobbying from libertarian and cryptocurrency communities who had come to view him as a folk hero rather than a felon, closed the loop on the very first chapter of this story. But not the story itself. By the time Ulbricht walked free, the total value of Bitcoin his original marketplace had once processed, recalculated at cryptocurrency's later peak prices, would have been worth not the $214 million prosecutors cited at trial, but something approaching $1 trillion, a number so large it retroactively turned what was once treated as the internet's most notorious criminal enterprise into, almost accidentally, one of the earliest and most consequential demonstrations that cryptocurrency-based commerce could actually work at scale. Nobody who built these platforms set out to prove anything about legitimate business. But they did, almost by accident, run one of the largest uncontrolled experiments in marketplace economics the world has ever seen, proving that commission-based platforms, reputation systems, and escrow protections can function even in the total absence of law, brand trust, or any safety net at all. They weren't just building criminal enterprises. They were building proof that the marketplace model itself doesn't need permission to work, only incentives strong enough to make strangers trust each other, and consequences severe enough eventually to remind them why laws existed in the first place. If stories like this, about the hidden economics behind the systems that quietly shape how money and trust actually move through the world, are the kind of thing you want more of, consider subscribing for more deep dives into money, business, investing, and hidden economics.